All right, let's take a look at some vocabulary that has to do with circles. First, we have a chord. Now, a chord is described as a line segment that connects any point on the circle to any other point on the circle. Okay, so it has to touch two different places on the circle. I'll draw you some examples for you. Okay, so this line segment right here, that would be a chord. Say it is the segment from A to B. Okay, so again, a chord goes anywhere from any one point on the circle to any other point on the circle. Okay, so it can be short, it could be little tiny like this one right here. That's a chord, touches any two places on the circle. Or it could even be the diameter. So it could go all the way across the circle and through the center. Okay, so the black line, the red line, and the blue line, those are all examples of chords. The next one we have is called a secant. A secant is a line or line segment that passes through a circle in any 2 points. So the chord, notice, is a segment. It starts on the edge of the circle, it ends on the edge of a circle. The secant is similar to that. However, the secant passes right on through the circle, so it still goes through any 2 points, but notice it continues outside of the circle. It doesn't stop when it hits the edge. Okay, so it can be a line or it can be a line segment, either one, but it does have to extend somewhat past the outside of the circle. Okay, so those are both examples of secants for the circle. Again, it's a line or line segment that passes through any 2 points on the edge of the circle. Okay, and the last one we have here is a tangent. Okay, a tangent touches a circle in just one point, and that point, they call it the point of tangency. Okay, so a tangent, it's usually called a tangent line. It goes right past a circle and just brushes it so that it only touches the circle in one spot. Okay, so notice it intersects the circle right here at this point, and that's it. Okay, and we call that point the point of tangency. Okay, so that is an example of a tangent line. They can be in more than one place. So I could draw another tangent line to this circle. Again, it's a line that goes and just brushes the edge of the circle so that just barely intersects it in one point. Okay, so that is what a chord, a secant, and a tangent, those are their definitions. Let's do some practice identifying them. So let's label each segment as either a radius, a diameter, or a chord. Okay, sometimes more than one will apply. So first they want us to label AE. What would AE be? There's the line segment starting at A, going all the way down to E. Notice it goes through the middle of the circle, and it goes from one side to the other through the center. Okay, so we could call this a diameter. Notice it also qualifies as a chord because it touches 2 points on the circle. Okay. Next we have DE. So the segment DE starts at D and goes down to E. It's this line segment right here. It touches 2 points on the circle. That would qualify it as a chord. All right, next we have BC. Here's BC, this line going from B to the center of the circle C. A line that goes from the center to the edge of a circle is called a radius. So BC would be a radius. Now, if it's a radius, there's no way it could be a chord because chords have to touch 2 places on a circle, and the radius only touches 1. Next, they want us to look at AC. Here's AC. It's the line going from A to C, and it stops when it gets there. So let me highlight it. Okay, so there's AC in red. Again, it's a line that goes from the center to the edge of a circle, halfway across the circle, so it is a radius also. Next, we have FD. FD FD. Where is FD located? Here it is. Okay, let's take a look. What type of line would FD be? Here it is right here from F to D. It touches 2 points on the edge, goes from one point on the edge to another, but it does not go through the center. Here's the center here. So it doesn't pass through the very center, so it cannot be a diameter. It does touch 2 points on the circle, however, so that classifies it as a chord. And finally, they want us to do the line segment CE. So the line starting at C and going to E. Okay, an orange right there. So here is CE. It goes from the center to the edge of the circle, so that would make it a radius. Okay, so that's identifying some of those segments that are inside of a circle. Now let's identify once again. This time we're going to name the segment. They want us to name all of them that qualify. So first they want all diameters. Again, a diameter has to go from one edge of the circle to the opposite side, and it has to pass through the center. The only line I can see that does that is the line, that's the only line that goes through the center of the circle and from one side to the other. So CE would be the only diameter for this circle. Next, they want all radii. Now that means that's plural or more than one for radius. So they want every single line segment that could be a radius. So any line segment that comes from the center and goes to the edge is going to be a radius. So let me make those each a different color. Here's one that starts at the center O and goes out to C. OC would be a diameter, or excuse me, a radius. I don't know why I said diameter. Here's another one coming out from the center, goes to the edge. OB would also be a radius. And finally, here's the only other line coming out from O. So that would be our only other option. OE goes from the center to the edge. So I have 3 radii. Again, they are OC, OB, and OE. And you can write those names in the opposite order. You can call them CO, BO, and EO. All right, how about the next one once all chords? Now remember, what is a chord? A chord is any line segment that touches, that goes from one point on the circle to another point on the circle. So let's take a look. Okay, here is a chord. Notice it goes from G to B. It touches 2 points on the circle. So GB is going to be a chord. Or BG, you can write it either way. Are there any other chords? Are there any other lines that go from one edge to the opposite edge? Well, notice GD, as long as we just use the segment part of GD and not the line that goes to the outside, as long as we just go from G to D and stop. So we would want to make sure we wrote that as a segment so we don't put the arrows on our line over the top. So GD would be a chord. Any others? Well, hopefully you noticed that right here are diameter. Diameters are also chords. It does go from one point on the circle to another. So our diameter is also a chord. Our diameter CE. Those are all of the chords in that figure. Okay, next we're asked to identify all secants. So remember, a secant goes all the way through the circle and out the other side. Now notice this is a line, but it just touches here. It doesn't go through the circle. Here I have one, however. So this line here would be a secant. It goes right through the circle, touches it in 2 spots, here at G and here at D. Now I'll want to make sure and name this properly, it would be line GD extending outside. So notice the difference between GD the segment and GD the line. And that is the only secant in that figure. The last thing they want is all tangents. Well, a tangent is a line that just brushes along the edge of a circle as it passes by. So that would be this line here. It does intersect the circle just in that one point B. And it would be line A. Okay, so again with AB, I'm going to make sure I put the line over the top. The other way they may name a line is by giving it a cursive letter out here, like line L. But in this case, they just gave us the points. Okay, so we were able to name all tangents, chords, radius, diameter, secant of that figure.